This is a story that I wrote called Fraud at Georgetown Finance Shakes the Foundation of the Corporate Bond Literature, followed by a second story called Georgetown Professor Stripped of Tenure Following My Investigation. And it's one of the most explosive, craziest scandals in the history of the academic finance profession. But when I wrote it, the mainstream media did not cover it because, first of all, my Substack back then was much smaller than it is today. So I didn't have the reach or influence to circulate it to mainstream media. But also because when you dive into the corporate bond literature, it gets very dense and very arcane very quickly. And so, what we're talking about today is finance professors who study theoretically and empirically when a company issues debt, how that debt should be priced, how risky is that debt, and what happens when companies default. This is a very big deal for Wall Street because on Wall Street, they issue not billions, but trillions of dollars worth of corporate debt every year. And if the academic underpinnings that determine how that debt should be priced are based on fraud, then it's a very big deal for finance. And so you can read this story that I've written. I've put a link to it in the description of this video, and we're going to dive into it today. And I'm going to try to make it digestible for a layman. The name of the paper that we're talking about today is Common Risk Factors in the Cross Section of Corporate Bond Returns, published in the Journal of Financial Economics in 2019, which is the #1 finance journal in the world. So imagine if you were a biologist, this would be like you published a paper in Cell or Nature or The Lancet. And the authors of that paper were three professors at the Georgetown Department of Finance. Their names were Jenny Bai, Turan Bali, and Quan Wen. And one of them, Bali, was actually an editor at the Journal of Financial Economics where this was published. So we're starting off right off the bat with a major conflict of interest. And where I first heard about the scandal, where it broke really, was a forum called econjobmarketrumors.com, which is where economists and finance professors go to gossip about their profession, basically. And what they were gossiping about was a second paper published in 2023 by a team of finance professors in Europe and in Australia. And what that second paper did was tear the first paper to shreds, basically. They alleged that the first paper manipulated their data to get fraudulent results. And this was a huge fight in the profession because the first paper by the Georgetown team was a foundational paper in the corporate bond literature, and hundreds of other papers relied on this paper. Literally, like dozens or hundreds of careers were built on the foundation of this paper. And it was a paper about a theoretical model called the capital asset pricing model, CAPM, which is a model that determines how bonds are priced on Wall Street. So let's break down what the Georgetown team's data error actually looked like. And they had something called a lead lag error, and which sounds complicated, but it's not that complicated. They had a spreadsheet of bond prices over time. So imagine a column with bond prices at time t minus one, and then the next month there's bond prices at time t, and then the next month there's bond prices at time t plus one. And what they did while they were building their data set is that they labeled one month's prices as though they belonged to the previous month. So a return listed for January, for example, would show February's price. And then at other times, the error went in the opposite direction. So returns were shifted backwards instead of forwards. So a return listed for January was actually December's return. And this was not off in a consistent way. So it wasn't like they inserted a column into the data that shifted everything forward by 1 month. What they did is sometimes when it was convenient for them, they would shift their data back by a month, and sometimes they would shift their data forward by a month. And by massaging their data like this, they could get statistically significant results. And this matters because what they were doing with this study was trying to determine whether certain characteristics of a bond could determine tomorrow's price. But you can't test whether something predicts the future while accidentally or on purpose doing fraud, feeding future information into the past. It's as if you were claiming to predict tomorrow's temperature by inserting tomorrow's temperature into today's spreadsheet. So you're not really looking ahead into the future, you're using tomorrow's data to predict tomorrow. When the second team identified and corrected for the Georgetown team's lead lag error, their results disappeared completely. They did not have statistically significant results because they were not able to look into tomorrow to determine tomorrow's bond price. But that was only the first data error. The second data error involved something called winsorization, which is the statistical process of deleting outliers. So, what the Georgetown team did is they deleted 10% of their worst outliers, their negative bond returns, and they did not tell anyone about this. They did not write in their paper, "Hey, this is what we're doing to the data." Instead, they hid it in a line of their code, and then when pressed, refused to release their code that showed how and to what extent they were deleting their outliers. And in simpler terms, what they did is they changed their most negative values in their data set, but other researchers could not see how or why those changes were being made, and then they lied about it. And that matters because removing or replacing those extreme 10% outliers, 10% of their data set, made their results appear much stronger than they really were. So again, when you corrected for their secret winsorization that they did, their results disappeared again. So, as this big fight was happening in the finance profession between the Georgetown paper and the newly updated paper, nobody ever contacted the journal. So, what I did is I emailed the Journal of Financial Economics and I said, "Hey, I'm from the independent media. I'm writing a story about this. Here's a series of questions I have about it." And they said, "We're looking into it. We'll get back to you." And then 2 weeks later, they retracted the Georgetown paper. And instead, what they did the right thing. They published the newly corrected paper in its place. And this was a big deal because in the entire history of the Journal of Financial Economics, again, the top journal in the world, they had never retracted a paper ever before. So this was their first retraction. And the Georgetown team was actually forced to apologize. They wrote, "The main result in the paper regarding the explanatory power of the bond factors does not survive the correction of this data error. And the authors deeply regret the damage this caused to the journal and to the scholarly community." So the journal did the right thing upon being contacted, but the bigger problem now is that this one fraudulent data poisoned an entire field of literature because there was a domino effect created where hundreds of other papers relied on this foundational Georgetown paper. And the question is now, what do we do with those hundreds of papers that relied on the Georgetown paper, which had fraudulent data? And the answer is nothing. Those hundreds of papers that relied on the Georgetown paper are still floating around out there. So it's very discrediting for the entire field of finance. The other question is, what do we do with these three Georgetown professors who were caught faking their data? And I emailed Georgetown several times. I called them. They would not respond to me. I said, "Are you looking into this? Are you launching an investigation? What's happening?" No answer. And 3 months after the paper was retracted, what they did is there was a team of three authors, right? And two of them were very senior. They'd been there for decades. They were big names in the field. But then the third one, poor Quan Wen, he was the junior co-author on this paper, and they threw him under the bus. He was their sacrificial lamb because he was downgraded on their website from associate professor with tenure to adjunct faculty and then scrubbed from the website altogether. So he no longer works there anymore, and there were no repercussions at all for the two senior authors. That's what happened. Thank you for listening. I hope that made sense. It's hard to explain sometimes, like data or statistical techniques via video, but I tried to explain it in a way that anybody could understand this corporate finance scandal. And so this was my second or third YouTube video. I'm still learning how to tell stories. And if you could become one of my first subscribers, I'd very much appreciate it. Hit that subscriber bell. Thank you.